Hello and welcome to this final video of the module where we'll look at rationalist explanations for war. The readings included also in this module if you'd like to do it, but I'm going to summarize it here. I'm going to talk about the main points that Fearon makes, why he's making them. But it's a great paper, right? And the idea is it's a realist, it's an attempt, I think, to shore up neo-realist theory and sort of hone in a little bit the reasons within the theory that states might go to war. Fearon was not satisfied with the sort of reasoning that was coming out of neo-realist work about why wars occur. One of the main things that we should, I mean, the title of this is Rationalist Explanations for War. And so one of the main things we should take away, right, is that for neo-realists and for realists generally, states act rationally when they're making their decisions about conflict, about maximizing their power, about survival. When they're making these decisions, they're acting rationally. And Fearon didn't feel like some of the explanations for warfare didn't seem rational enough for him. So that's what we're going to look at today, his attempt to sort of rectify that problem there. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen. So here we are now, rationalist explanations for war. So, why does war exist? From a rationalist perspective, like war shouldn't really occur, Fearon says. And this is the reason why. He says it's always costly ex post. What he means by this is whenever there's a war, you've got a one winner and one loser. And actually, like this result that's going to be achieved, it was always going to be achieved. If assuming that we have the knowledge of the power of this country and the power of that country, we can figure out who's going to win the war. And so, but even if we're wrong about which side is going to win, we do know that one side is going to win. One of the two sides is going to win. And so that result, if we could come to that result without war, that would be more rational, right? It'd be less costly, right? So we can either have a war about it, and then people will die. We'll have to spend more on our military. We'll lose a bunch of our resources. We'll lose maybe some of our factories, our industrial base, our population, our financial resources. These are all going to be drained during the war, and so it would be better for both sides, even the loser, to come to an agreement before the war. So let's say this, so Russia and Ukraine, right? Let's say they're going to have a war. And, you and me probably agree right at the beginning, look, Russia's going to win this war. And if we looked into it more closely and really analyzed the sort of power and everything that was at play, we could even make maybe perhaps more of a detailed prediction about the results. Okay, so let's say we do that. And let's say we do it. Let's say you and me are with the best international relations scientists, and we come up with a fairly accurate prediction of exactly what's going to happen. Okay. At this point now, so we know now what's going to happen. So there's a choice now. We can fight the war and have that happen, or we could just make that happen and not have the war. And even though Ukraine would lose the war, and even though they might lose territory, significant territory, that they'd be better off agreeing to do that now rather than fighting a war and then doing it. And so this is the problem that Fearon's seeing. He's saying if both sides are rational, they would just come to an agreement. They wouldn't have the war because the war would cost Russia something and it would cost Ukraine something. It would cost them both something. And so they might as well just, and they'll spend all this money and the result's going to be the result. So they could have the same result if they just came to an agreement without the war. So this is the thing he's trying to explain. So why then is there ever any war if states are rational actors? And so he says, look, up to now, we've had these sort of three types of arguments about why war happens under these circumstances. And he says, well, first of all, you get some arguments from other scholars that say, well, state leaders are irrational. Putin, he's all about sort of his personal legacy and the glory of the Soviet Union, and he was a taxi driver after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and he has some sort of emotional response, right? That means he's going to go to war. He wants to make the West pay. He wants to make Ukraine pay for leaving Russia, right? That's irrational. Right, because you can get the same result without the war. So that's one argument, right? In the literature, state leaders are irrational, but that obviously that doesn't fit into what Fearon's trying to do, because he wants to say no, everybody's rational, and we still have wars. So that's the first. The second one is, well, yes, there are costs involved in having a war, but the leaders don't pay them. The leaders make the decisions to go to war, but they don't actually have to pay any of the costs. And that's a very old argument, right? That goes back. We're going to talk about liberalism in the next module, and we'll talk about, we'll go all the way back to like Immanuel Kant, who says exactly that. So that's another argument that's out there in the literature, and it's an old one. The third type of argument is the one that Fearon, I think, is trying to make, that we have rational leaders, they weigh up the costs and the benefits, and they still fight wars. Right? Just the benefits outweigh the costs, something like that. So that's a third option. The thing is, for Fearon, if war's not caused by rational calculations of costs and benefits, if it's one of the first two explanations on the last slide, then neorealism is wrong. It's a bad theory, right? Because it says that the states are rational actors, and it would just be wrong. So if it's not rationality, then it would be human nature, or particular states would cause war, which again, as I said, it goes against neorealist theory. It doesn't go against, it might not go against realism, right? It might not go against Morgenthau, right? Who says that we have this human nature, this drive, psychobiological drive for dominance, right? That classical realists would say that, but neo-realists won't say that. They say, no, it's not human nature, it's rationality, right? And remember, it's governed by these laws that sort of, if X, then Y, right? So we states act in the way that they have to act based on rational models. So in order to uphold neorealism, we have to find a rationalist explanation for war. Otherwise, we have to concede the ground to either the classical realists or to the liberals or something later on. So there's these 5 prominent answers that Fearon argues against in the paper. One, anarchy. It's like, well, yeah, there is anarchy, but anarchy itself doesn't cause war. It states, not everybody's not at war right now, right? So anarchy, and we're in an anarchic system, so it has to be something other than anarchy. Another argument that he argues against is that the expected benefits outweigh the costs, right? It's still cheaper not to have the war, it's even better to not have the war, right? It's even a bigger benefit. It outweighs the costs even more if you don't fight the war, because there's not the costs anymore. He argues against rational preventive war. Preventive war is when I see that you're gaining ground on me, and so I'm going to fight you now so I don't have to fight you later when you're more powerful. Rational miscalculation due to a lack of information he wants to argue against, and we've talked about that one, I think, in the last lecture, right? But that's another possibility. Right? Wars happen because we're making rational calculations, but the information we don't have is not correct. And then the next one is a similar one. Maybe it's a subset of that. It's rational miscalculation or disagreement about relative power. I think I'm more powerful than you, so I think I'm going to win the war, so I'm going to fight the war. But in reality, you're more powerful than me, and I lose the war. And I wouldn't have fought the war if I'd have known that. But because I miscalculated, then I started the war. So Walt says war occurs because there's nothing to prevent it. Fearon doesn't like that. He says that war is still costly, and states could still come to an agreement before any war in order to save themselves the costs. just because war can happen doesn't mean rational actors would choose it. We need to find a real cause, Fearon says. So you see, he's adding to Walt's here. He's building on Walt's. He's saying, no, Walt's, it wasn't enough. Like, your explanation wasn't enough. But I still want to be a neo-realist, but I want to improve neo-realism. Preventive war. It's argued that a declining power might attack a rising power to slow or stop its rise, which I think I explained that when I talked about preventive war on the other slide. But imagine, like as an example, imagine China sort of on the rise now. At some point, it's going to overtake the United States. The United States might attack China, might beat it now, beat it down to stop it from challenging him later. But Fearon says, well, why not come to a deal, though, right? War's still costly, right? The rising power wants to rise in peace, and the declining power doesn't want to add costs to war to its already increasing costs. And so the rising power would make concessions, and then the established power wouldn't have to, the declining power wouldn't have to pay the costs of war. So he's arguing against these. So there's positive expected utility, but the benefits outweigh the costs. So there's a common argument in international relations that suggests that both sides, there might be situations where both sides prefer war. We're going to get something better out of the war than we would out of a deal. But for Fearon, there's always a negotiated settlement that leaves both sides better off. And this is the example he gives. He says, look, let's say there's you and me, you who's watching this and me. And let's say I have $100, and we can split it, right? And we can agree to split it. And maybe I say, well, I've got the $100 here, right? And you're far away and I don't have to give you anything. And so I'll give you $20 and I'll keep 80, right? So that's, you might say, well, no, you should split 50-50, right? If we're going to split a deal, right, we should both have the same amount, right? And so we could argue that backwards and forwards, we could come up with a deal. Or instead of that, we could both pay $20 and then go to war. If we decide to do that, there's a 50% chance of getting the full 100. Which do you want to choose? And so if you pay 20 and I pay 20, then there's $60 left, right? There's still $100, but you're $20 down now, you're minus 20. And like, let's say I use 20 from the 100 and now there's 80 left. Or let's say I use 20 of my own money, but we're both negative 20. So it's negative 40 altogether. And then there's this 100 that we're going to share between us. And there's a 50-50 chance that I'll get it. So I might end up with 80 and you might end up with 0. Or you might end up with 80 and I might end up with 0. But do you see how the amount has gone down now? Because we've had to pay the costs of war. So the amount that either of us are going to benefit is less. So you should have taken, let's say I win the war and I get 80 and you get 0. It would have been better for you to have had 10 and me to have had 90 and not gone to war, right? So anyway. And so his point is this, though, it's even if states miscalculate their chances of winning, even if I think, no, it says 50%, but I'm sure I'm going to win. Even if I miscalculate my chance of winning, I should still know that there's a better, even if I win the war, I'm only up 80 and I could have been up 90. And you would have had 10. If I'd have given you 10, I could have had 90, right? Rather than go to war, we'd have both been better off. So we have to know that, right? The states, if they're rational actors, they know that there's more to be had if we come to an agreement rather than if we pay the costs of war. So states should be risk averse as well. They shouldn't be foolhardy, right, if they're rational. So Fearon says, okay, there's 3 defensible answers then to why rational. The first one is that maybe the states go to war because they can't reach a settlement due to private information about capabilities or resolve and incentives to misrepresent such. So maybe I know I've got a new weapon that you've never seen before. but I'm not going to tell you that. Well, and the other thing is, even if I do tell you that, you're not going to believe me, because you're going to say, well, yeah, sure, you've got a new weapon that's so powerful that I'm never going to stand a chance. Like, of course you're going to say that, right? You're trying to convince me to concede. And so you shouldn't believe me, right? So that's one way, right? It's private information. It's not that we've miscalculated the information. It's that I have some information that only I know for sure. I might be telling you about it, but you probably shouldn't believe me. Or I might not tell you about it because I might want to surprise you with it later on. Another reason that you might not be able to reach a settlement or a bargain is because of commitment problems. And the commitment problems goes like this. It's like, okay, you and me, we reach a deal. Let's say I say, okay, I'll send you the 30, I want to keep the 70. Okay, we won't go to war. All right. And so you say, all right, I agree, we won't go to war. You have 70, I'll take 30. Okay. Well, let's say 5 days passes and there's no sign of the $30 that I promised you. In fact, what I've done is I've took the $100 and I don't know, I've spent it on pizza or something like that. I don't know. I've spent it all. And so you're still waiting. And you say, well, wait a second, you promised me. And I say, well, yeah, what are you going to do about it though? Right? It's gone now. The money's gone. There's none left. I spent yours, I had mine. We did have a deal, but I just went back on it, basically. And that's where anarchy comes in, right? Because there's no police force. I mean, in this example between you and me in the United States, if we had a contractor, you could take me to court. There is a police force, but in the international system, there's nobody to enforce those deals. We sort of relying on each other to enforce the deal. And so if I back out on it, that's commitment problems. So we can't reach a bargain because you say, yeah, I don't believe you're going to give me the 30, so I'm just going to go to war with you. And there's nothing I can do to convince you that I'm going to give you the 30. The third one is that there's some issues that might be indivisible, meaning like, so $100, we can divide that between us, but maybe something like, I don't know, the Dome of the Rock, the Temple Mount there, right? That might seem indivisible, or the city of Jerusalem, that might seem indivisible, right? Nobody would be happy with half of it. You've got to have the whole of it. It can't be shared. Fearon thinks that most things can be shared, even Jerusalem could be shared. But there might be some good that might be indivisible, and that would be a defensible answer as to why wars happen. It's like, we can't share this. Whatever deal we can come up with, we can't both have this thing, so we're going to fight. He then talks about private information. It's not the lack of information that causes war, but it's the thing that prevents disclosure. See that again, we've got these first two miscalculations, these first two explanations here: emotional commitments and complexity. But they're both irrational, and we don't want any irrational reasons. We only want rational ones. And the only way that miscalculations might be explained in a rational way is the private information thing. So wars occur because we make miscalculations, and the reason why we might make calculations rationally miscalculate is that there's some information that's private. So I have access to it, you don't, and even if I tell you about it, you won't believe me because you'll think, well, yeah, you should say that you've got this big weapon that's going to destroy me with just one press of the button. Sure, you've got that, of course. Who would want to go to war against that? But maybe it's really true. Maybe I really do have it. And so that makes it difficult. Or that's the sort of rational explanation behind a miscalculation. Not the other ones, not emotional commitments, not based on feelings, nationalist feelings, or this is a sacred site, we're never going to give it up. Right, that'd be emotional commitment. There's complexity, right? There's too much. We all have the same information, but two rational actors are reaching the same conclusion. It's like, no, that's also irrational. The two rational actors should reach the same conclusion about the same information, or it's not rational by definition. The only one that is rational is the private information. And then he says, look, it is hard to bargain because of anarchy in terms of commitment problems, and the threat that the other side might defect from the agreement, right? Might go back on the agreement later. And he talks about gunslingers. thing with gunslingers, like imagine a town in the old American West, and you've got these two gunslingers going around the town, and they're both afraid of each other, right? Because they're both the best, sort of quickest draw in the town, right? And they're going around and they're sort of dominating the place, but they're both afraid of each other. And so they come to an agreement that says, we won't shoot each other. We won't use our skills against each other. But the problem with that is, like, yeah, they might both want to make that deal and they might both want to believe it, but it's so advantageous to the other one to shoot you in the back when you're not looking. It's so advantageous because now they have the full reign of the town. Nobody can challenge them. Because of that massive incentive to shoot the guy in the back as soon as he walks away, it's very hard to commit to that sort of a deal. Let's say you and me are the gunslingers in the town. I might really want to believe you because I don't want to get killed, and you could kill me. But there is an offensive advantage, and I know that. Right? The offensive advantage is that, like, the one who shoots the other one first is likely the one that's going to win. So it's advantageous for me to attack you, and it's advantageous for you to attack me. And because we both know that, it's very hard to come to an agreement not to attack each other. Because today we make the agreement and then I turn around to walk away and boom, you shot me in the back. And you have a massive incentive to do that because you'll get the whole town to yourself. And it's the same with states with great powers. Any agreement they make, there's almost a massive advantage for them to go against it. And so both sides know that. So it's very hard to come up with any sort of a deal. And that, I believe, concludes the argument of Fearon. He's trying to increase the level of rationality within neo-realist explanations for war, but that's a very good introduction to sort of explanations for why the wars happen between rational actors within neo-realism. And so this really does conclude our sections, our 2 modules on realism. There'll be a paper about this, about realism, so watch out for that, and good luck with it. Use anything from these slides or from these lectures or from any of the reading that you've done on your own.